everybody, welcome to another episode of What a Hell of a Way to Die. It's me and it's Nate's. And Nate, I want to start us out with an apology today because apparently we've lost a listener because we spend 10 minutes ragging on the British every morning, or first 10 minutes, which is not true. We don't just rag on the British. We also rag on the this entire podcast is about making fun of the American military. So, you gotta dole it out a little bit around the place. So our apologies to the Queen. We will be, setting up a Congolese death camp in your honor or something. I don't fucking know.
Yeah, I mean, the reason we talk about it as often as we do is because I live here. And I reckon that if I didn't live here, we probably wouldn't talk about it very often. Although we might still talk about it a little, just because invariably when you hear something really deeply deranged happening in the world that involves what you might describe as a kind of weaponized nostalgia for an event that people don't remember. I mean, the boomers and people who were definitionally too young to have fought in World War II getting really, really bent out of shape about World War II and how they fought somehow and how they stormed the beaches at Normandy and how they were at Dunkirk. And I think, America is deranged in its own right. I mean, it has always been. It's
the greatest thing that could happen to a British person is if they were killed by a Nazi, it seems. Like, it always seems like, oh, well, the kids today with the avocado toast, they wouldn't be, fighting the Jerrys. Like,
what the fuck is your accent?
I don't know. I had something a little bit better because I just watched a Milo accent, so I was kind of like pulling Milo's accent. I don't know what ended up happening with that, though.
The children these days don't want to get killed in a war. They'd rather just sit around playing Fortnite. I mean, you couldn't respawn at Dunkirk.
You got to imagine I have a jaw that juts out about 3 inches further than my nose when I talk like that.
Yeah. So I have a funny story about the one English accent that I can kind of do convincingly, which is it's not even that good, but that's the one. It's David Baddiel. The reason is I find David Baddiel so unbelievably offensive and stupid. But one time I had a client who did an interview with him and I had to produce some audio and video stuff. And I was going through and transcribing this so I could do subtitles on a video. And just everything he said annoyed the shit out of me so much that I just sort of started saying it back to myself mockingly. And then I realized, I was like, wait a minute, did I just, it's like, the parable where you practice something long enough and you fail at it, but then randomly out of nowhere, you can suddenly do it. I was just like, wait a second. I can do this accent. Only David Baddiel, who's a washed up 90s Gen Xer comedian who's famous for doing blackface and on TV and has positioned himself to be a sort of scold of the left who says that the left is racist. And he got really on one about how supposedly everybody who voted for Jeremy Corbyn is anti-Semitic. But David Baddiel has written a book about how anti-Semitism is allowed and how Jews don't count. That's literally the title. But still refuses to personally apologize for the guy who he dressed up in blackface to make fun of and whose football career he ruined because this guy couldn't play without people harassing him and making monkey noises at him. And because David Baddiel imitated this guy's dreadlocks by wearing a pineapple on his head, people would come to football matches with pineapples on their head. And his own family couldn't come because they were so horrified by how racist it was. Because there's a British Jewish comedian doing blackface in the 90s on TV. So he's not the only, when someone's like, oh yeah, there's this British Jewish comedian and he's really mad at the left and says that everyone who voted for Jeremy Corbyn is anti-Semitic. And it's you can't even say, oh, the one who did blackface, because there's lots of them. There's Matt Lucas who also did blackface in the 2000s on TV. There's a couple others whose names I've forgotten, but at one point someone was like, oh yeah, we made this listicle. And it's all these guys who are TV comedians who are mad about politics now who did blackface on TV in the 90s or 2000s. So the extent to which we make fun of Britain because so much insane stuff comes out of it. The point I was going to make earlier was that America loses its mind about the troops, but I've never seen Americans in the middle of a pandemic dress up as Spitfire fighter planes and do a conga line coughing on each other on their street. And that absolutely happened in Britain. And it wasn't a joke. It wasn't irony. It was sincere. It was genuine. And that to me was just sort of Maybe bovine spongiform encephalopathy has hit people a lot harder than they want to admit.
Didn't it take a little bit longer for the Brits to get the lead out of their paint and stuff?
Well, they were really aggressive about not getting rid of leaded gasoline or leaded petrol. In fact, there's one factory in the world or production plant that still makes leaded petrol for, special, probably old-fashioned or old machines that still can only use leaded petrol, is in England. And there was actually a lot of dissent about getting rid of it for some reason. I want to say they didn't get rid of leaded petrol in this country until like 1990. But it was genuinely like kind of a culture war thing, as everything is in this country. Just as like, the people who are really hardcore into culture war stuff basically want to, once we take back control, they want to reinstate the death penalty and also reinstate tungsten light bulbs.
Weren't we about to do that? Didn't Trump want to do a thing where it's just like all the damn, the old light bulbs, we want to bring them. The people want the old light bulbs back. They say to me, President Trump, we're tired of not changing our light bulbs every 6 to 8 months. We need to be able to change our light bulbs and constantly be buying and throwing away light bulbs. They tell me this every day. Get rid of the LED light bulbs. They last too damn long. People want to change light bulbs.
I mean, what's funny is that I understand people's dislike of LED light bulbs in the sense that they're great, but they just aren't the same. Like there's something kind of uncanny about how close but not the same they are. And I've also found that they do last a long time, but they absolutely get weaker over time, which can be kind of frustrating. But I mean, if you look at, I'm willing to just buy brighter light bulbs and accept the fact that that's a thing I got to mitigate, knowing that, you use like 1/10 as much power using an LED light bulb as you do an incandescent light bulb. And, if you swap out all the lights out there that incandescent or high pressure sodium or all sorts of things, like anywhere you can swap out an LED bulb, you wind up saving massive amounts of power. And so it's a good thing. But I remember when Obama got elected, that a lot of the really deranged conservatives who were just not your standard Wall Street Journal, New York Post editorial. Actually, New York Post is a little too crazy, but say Wall Street Journal editorial, yelling about Obama, like the full-on Obama derangement syndrome, like the guy who for Christmas spelled out Obama in Christmas lights in the snow and then had a Santa peeing onto Obama because he was so mad, like that level of deranged.
So much energy goes into things like that, man. We need to harness that. We need to harness, if we could harness Americans' racism into like a renewable power. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's why racism is still so. No, I mean I know it's about power structures, but let's get a positive out of a negative. Let's at least charge some homes by stuffing racist people into a furnace.
If Americans legitimately just found a way to redirect the anger and energy that they expend being racist, we could do so much as a society. But I think it's a tendency that I think unites reactionaries across the world, or at least in my experience. And that is inventing something to be mad at and then getting so mad at it that you think it's real. And I think one of the manifestations of this, because I mean, Obama's first term, there were things about renewable energy. Some of that has actually paid off a lot. I mean, my home state has actually really adopted solar and wind in a way you wouldn't expect. I know Iowa's massive on solar, but wind particularly, like huge amounts of wind. I remember back in the early 2000s when it felt like, aside from a few test sites, the only place where you could really see at scale utility wind power was California. And now when I go home, man, I see it everywhere, especially solar, like in places you just wouldn't expect. But the conservatives lost their minds about this stuff. And every time, I remember there were a couple of political cartoonists that they made it a point that their deranged, grotesque caricature of Obama that they had in their political cartoons, whenever he had some new Marxist idea or whatever, the light bulb was always a CFL bulb and not an incandescent bulb. They're so mad. They're so fucking mad that apparently Obama literally can't have normal thought light bulbs. They have to redefine cartoon stuff. They have to make the green stink lines coming off him Marxist somehow, because it makes them so mad that he can't be drawn normal. And that, I think that is, obviously, Obama has revealed himself to be an extraordinarily conservative politician, but that anger, that mad, just brain-breaking craziness, I feel like that never went away. And as such, you see some of that here too in its own way, because we also have a lot of completely lead-poisoned, insane conservatives, but it manifests itself slightly differently. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. I mean, it's the big difference, I think, between a falling empire and a fallen empire. And I think, obviously, America's the former and Britain's the latter. So yeah, I reserve the right to make fun of this country that I live in and pay taxes in and work in and, can't leave for the time being. Yeah, if British people get mad about that, then I don't know, go...
The Queen's getting her dole from you, man. You can say whatever you want. Because in reality, you are an American, and if necessary, we'll redraft you into the military and let you go conquer England.
Well, that's the thing, right? It's like, get mad if you want. I mean, I'm paying council tax for services that I'm definitely not using, and I'm paying income tax for services I'm definitely not using, and I don't mind because that's the price of living in a civilized society. But I know for a fact that the money that I'm putting in is probably, like, a lot of it is going to social care for your racist relatives if they live in Southwark. So, like, I don't care. That's society. When I was doing mutual aid stuff in this neighborhood, you would go deliver groceries and prescription shit to people and then turn around and they've spammed the WhatsApp group with Boris copy pasta. Like, Boris is so brave. No prime minister's ever fought as hard as he has. And just like, man, fuck off. But like, that's the kind of shit you deal with. That's the price of living in a civilized society. And
that's the problem with being a socialist too, is that you got to still care about those people.
Yeah, I know, right? Well, that's the thing too, is that Brits get furious when you criticize stuff. And it's like, I'm not saying that this is to the exclusion of everything else. Like, we know America sucks. It's like, I fucking left America. Yeah. I know America sucks really bad. Like, it's not a surprise to me. It's just that, like, I think that there's a pronounced defensiveness here that it definitely exists in America, but I think the position that you and I are at, and the position that even a lot of mainstream, probably more center left to centrist commentators, thinkers, writers, etc., are at now, is way, way more sort of conceding that America's got a problem with racism and race, and that, like, the way that America's history is built on racial and economic exploitation, like, getting a comparable admission from your garden variety like centrist Brit would be impossible, because they have to be like, well, we didn't have slavery in Britain, so we can't be as bad as America. It's like, no, you started slavery and you made all your money off it, and all of your city's wealth is from that, and all the fucking Industrial Revolution was funded by it. Like, your entire country is funded on slavery. The reason why there's so many statues of slave owners everywhere in this country, and like people who colonized fucking Rhodesia and shit, it's because your entire economy was oriented around skimming off the top. And like, all of your coastal cities that have ports, or at least ports on the Atlantic, like, I don't know, like fucking Bristol, like Liverpool, like Glasgow, like, they're all implicated in the goddamn slave trade. Like, this country was built economically on the money from slavery. And just because you didn't have slavery in this country does not mean this country is not implicated. And it's like, I just wish these fucking cross-eyed Brit-bongs could get it through their skulls. Like, I'm not saying that when we address this stuff, that means that you let America off the hook. I'm not at all saying that. I'm saying just live in the fucking world. That's all I'm asking. And I'm speaking slightly quietly because I have my windows open and I don't want the Brits to hear me.
So with the Brits, hey, you talking bad about the Queen in there? Hey, you calling us racist? You calling us racist,
Francis?
Look,
you sound you genuinely. It sounds like the Menomina monster from the Muppets who lived in Britain for a year as a child when you do that accent.
Look, Governor Abbott of Texas just like wrote a thing because conservatives shit their bed so hard about the 1619 Project, which is like a thing about, which is basically like, hey, here's a thing about like the history of like how racism has formed in America.
Yeah, how chattel slavery basically got formalized in America. Yeah,
every conservative lost their mind and just like, no, we can't let the kids learn that. So Governor Abbott in Texas, like, we're going to do the 1836 Project, which is about patriotic Texas history. And if you look up 1836 in Texas, it's like that's when they fought the Mexican-American War, and that's when they said specifically, we are allowing slavery, and if you want to free your slaves, you need to get a letter from Congress to free them.
Also, so, the same time, because I remember reading about this, they also passed a law in Texas around that same time, I believe 1836, that said free black people are not allowed to live in Texas. And if they try, if any free black people living in Texas have to leave the state within, I think it was 1 year of the passage of the law. Otherwise, they'd be forcibly re-enslaved. And if they couldn't pay to be let out of bondage on their own to leave the state after 1 year of imprisonment of enslavement, then they would be sold to slave owners as slaves.
Which, you know what? I'm all about every state having its own, like, hey, we should have our state historical reckoning with slavery, because like Missouri Civil War history is fucking wild. Like Missouri was just absolutely insane throughout all of the Civil War. You hear a lot about like Gettysburg and all the other, but like Missouri had its own nonsense going on. And I would love to sit down and have those conversations. But I mean, I also live in a state that went harder for Trump in 2020. So I'm probably not going to see that. Whatever our Missouri Compromise curriculum that Senator Greitens is going to push on us, I'm sure is going to be great.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to talk about the history of slavery in Indiana. There was no slavery in Indiana. And yet you had people sending militias to fight for the Confederacy out of counties in Southeast Indiana. Like, you know, I'd love to talk about the history of slavery in America. I'd love to talk about individual states. I'd love to talk about the fact that my home state was run by the Klan formally in the 1920s. Like, but that's the thing, right? People's feelings get hurt because you're like, oh, you're saying my grandpa was racist? Yes, he was.
Probably.
All of them were.
My grandpa was racist. I'll
very,
tell you that
very
right
few
now.
weren't. If you are a Quaker or descended from Quakers, chances are good your relatives are not racist, or at least not as racist. But other than that, man, there were plenty of people who worked for abolition who were advocates of abolition. There were people who opposed slavery in the 1600s. The fact of the matter is, most people didn't. And you got no one is saying you have to hate your Meemaw. We're just saying, like, folks, don't lie to yourselves.
I'm not here to cancel fucking Texas in 1836. I don't give a shit. But like, you know, just have an understanding of your history so you can, like, you know, properly put the current times in the context. But you know, I pretty much at this point, I figure anybody who like says, but our traditions, I'm just like, I know I shouldn't just automatically think this person's a Nazi, but like they are at least fascist adjacent. So, you know, anytime, but what about tradition? Okay, shut the fuck up, fascist. You guys, if you're going to cry about a light bulb, I'm just going to assume that you think that internment camps maybe are a good idea for some people.
But it also makes me laugh too,
because
because
that's not a thing I can get behind.
It also makes me laugh too, though, because invariably these people are like, you know, we must return to tradition, and they're using V's in the place of U's. But like the artwork they're using or the stuff they're using is all basically advertising artwork from anywhere from the late 19th century to like the 1950s. Like, this is what they took from you. It's like, well, you say this is what they took from you, but this is just a family having a barbecue outside. Like, I think you can still do that. I don't think that I don't think that you're banned from doing that. I mean, if you're like, I mean, here you'll see this happen a lot. And it's really creepy. You'll see folks online, you know, on Twitter, on Facebook, etc. A lot of like British local news. The Facebook comments are almost invariably not moderated at all, and so like less so on the articles themselves, but like when these local news pages share the articles via their Facebook pages, the comments just go bonkers. And you'll see people talking about stuff like sharing these genuinely kind of creepy photos of, you know, kindergartners in Poland where there's like everyone is white. And they're like, see, this is what it used to be like. And it's like, man, have you been to anywhere outside of major cities in England? Like, that's what it looks like now. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like,
I don't think you guys realize this, but like black people are only like 13% of the population.
Not even that. I mean, in America, 13%. Yeah, I was gonna say here, I think it's something like 14% of the entire population is not white, but that includes everyone who is not white.
Right.
And when people try to say, oh, well, Britain's population is X number foreign born, and then get like, you know, great replacement about it, like the overwhelming majority of, I'll take that back. A significant number of Britain's foreign-born population are British people who were born in Ireland but have lived in Britain their entire lives.
I was going to say, you know, these things are racism because, like, if you're worried about like, oh, we don't have enough Americans to pay taxes or do X, Y, and Z because we're not boning enough and we're not having enough kids, we have a very simple solution to that. It's down at the border. It's called give everybody a social security number and bring them on in and let them get jobs and start, doing whatever and start paying taxes. But it's never about that. See, we got to keep certain people out and we have to make our own people. And that's how you know that it's a racism, because we can make anybody an American. It's very simple.
Yep.
Like, it's not, I know that our immigration process is difficult on purpose, but like, it doesn't have to be. Like, there's absolutely no reason why it couldn't take like 20 minutes to become an American citizen. Do you renounce your other citizenships? Yes or no? Thumbprint here, retina scan, whatever. Like, I'm sure there's going to be some kind of biometric that we got to get in. Here's your social security card. Here's a birth certificate that we're going to have with an approximation of your birth date or whatever documentation you brought. Go pay taxes like a good American citizen. But it's never like that, is it? It's always we need more people named Brantley and Chaz to be born and go to Ivy League schools and get law degrees and be incredibly mediocre, but for some reason have an incredible amount of power in this country.
Or go to like K through 12 Flag Gun Academy in North Carolina or whatever. I'm not saying that to mock the South. I literally used to see ads for like these Patriot Academy, K through 12. I mean, it might as well be K through 16 at this point. Schools in and around Fayetteville, North Carolina.
Were those boarding schools?
No, I don't think so. I think they were. I think they were day schools. But yeah, I mean, anybody like, I don't know what it's like in Missouri, which to my take is a southern state, but in the South, in my experience from where I lived, so much of private schools are just sort of like, let's keep segregation going. And they're invariably they're Christian. They're typically evangelical, although sometimes they can be like non-denominational evangelical, but sometimes they're Baptist, and sometimes, like, depending on where you are in the South, you might see have a significant number of people going, like in Savannah, for example, there's a lot of Catholics, but by and large, they're evangelical, they're Baptist, or they're non-denominational. And I mean, it's really, really a big thing. Like, private schools are huge, and they're very rarely anything but Christian schools. And one of the comments that I've seen a lot from folks that Cynthia has linked me up with, or accounts, things she's shared with me, is just folks saying like, yeah, it was a real shock when I went to public school, in high school or whatever, after having gone through private school in the South, K through 8 or whatever, K through 9, because it's like, I didn't know shit. Like, it was hard. Like, public school was hard. It was a better school too. Like, that kind of stuff is all, the sort of tail, like follow on to segregation. And it's just like, watching this stuff happen, I think the thing that really gets me the most is just the sheer denial of it. The denial that people have that this is what's going on, regardless of the evidence that's confronting them. And it's funny because we could talk this whole episode about denial and head in sand tendencies, both in the United States and here in the United Kingdom. But I think we could actually segue to talking about a different kind of denialism, which is the way people are freaking out about the fact that we are leaving Afghanistan. We are actually leaving Afghanistan. And we have an interesting, perhaps lighthearted story, to an extent lighthearted, about the German army having to hire a contractor to repatriate all of its beer that it brought to Afghanistan for its troops, because it is actually happening.
I didn't believe it at first. Like, I know that we had a thing about like, oh yeah, here we go, Afghan drawdown. Oh, so blah, blah. We're not gonna do anything like that. But I mean, the Germans are leaving. Everybody else is leaving. So I assume, like, and of course, when we say we're leaving, we mean like our very visible troop presence there, not the CIA fucking dudes and the special forces guys who are going to be, still running around and giving themselves TBIs and doing war crimes wherever they go. These are your normal, everyday you and me soldiers who went to Afghanistan and came back home. So, we have this thing about Germany who has they are at a point where they're leaving, and because violence is rising in Afghanistan, they're cutting everybody off from drinking and just sending all the booze home.
That's correct. So, I mean, one thing that folks who civilian listeners may not be aware of is that America has really been out of shape, uptight about alcohol in combat zones. Other militaries are not. I don't know about the British Army, but I do know that the French,
the British drink.
Yeah, I figured they do. I mean, don't get me wrong. I figured they do. I just don't have any experience with them because I was never in there was one province in southern Afghanistan where the British Army was I do think they were in Kandahar as well as Helmand, but like I think that
they owned Basra. They were in Basra until 2008, I think.
In Iraq,
So,
yeah, but in Afghanistan, I'm not sure.
Oh, Afghanistan! I thought they were all north.
They were all in the
Anyway.
south. Most of the NATO militaries are in the north, but I know that Britain was in, I believe, part of Kandahar and Helmand, and then eventually was just Helmand, and then Uruzgan was the Australians. But I don't know. Like I said, I'm sure they drink. I'm sure because it's the British Army, like it's Britain. It's but the French definitely drink. A friend of mine had a French liaison team attached to his company when he was in Wardak province and worked with those guys, and they were all they had like wine containers that they brought that was part of their rations and stuff. And in I remember being on Camp Phoenix or Camp Eggers or no, it was Kabul International Airport. There's like a base sort of what's it called, like big like area around the airport that was mostly like senior folks. And I remember seeing like a kiosk that was selling coffee and beer there, you know, like right outside or close to the what's it called, the entry point, like I don't know if it was VIP or whatever, but it's like the military sort of entry point at Kabul International Airport at that terminal. Because I got stuck there after escorting our provincial governor, and then my return flight never materialized, so I wound up having to just hang out in Kabul for a couple of days. But yeah, the Germans drink and they have beer there, but we don't. We are super uptight about it.
American troops don't know how to drink, to be fair. Like we just there's a reason why alcohol, like but I don't know, like is alcohol banned because everybody's a shithead, or is everybody a shithead and that's why alcohol is banned? Like, you know, when it comes to drinking and soldiers, I'm always just like, well, obviously we don't give the soldiers anything to drink because they're going to drink themselves stupid and they're not going to be effective tomorrow. But is that because we don't trust them? I don't know. I don't know, but yeah, the Americans, we had, now me in Iraq, I got to drink a couple of beers. There's so many, it's so much fun, like to talk to people about what was allowed and wasn't allowed in Iraq and Afghanistan during our respective times. Cause when I was in Afghanistan, the PX sold softcore porn. And this was 2004. The PX had like the like Playboy videos where it's just like a woman getting naked. You know, there's no actual sex or anything like that. It's just like some music and she's dancing around naked or whatever. So you could still get those. And then that was banned in 2004 while I was there. But then in 2009 in Iraq, they gave us like 2 beers on the Army's birthday and 2 beers on Super Bowl Sunday, like a bunch of Bud Lights carted into us. So it was all very like, oh, it's so, you know, it's such this huge privilege and everything. But I feel like American leadership is just concerned that if they allow soldiers to drink, they're especially when they all have access to incredibly high-powered rifles at any given time, that they're just going to go do some dumb shit. And the thing is that yes, somebody probably will do dumb shit, because also like the Germans and like the French and like the British, we're not raised with alcohol as like just this thing. So American, you know, just your average American 18-year-old has this weird idea of what alcohol is, and like this, that it's some great and wonderful thing that we need to just consume until our brains explode and then do it again the next day. And that's why Americans have our drinking problem. I don't know, but I fully support not letting my privates get shit-faced in Afghanistan. So
yeah, it was interesting to me. They obviously we couldn't drink, and even if we wanted to drink, it would have been very difficult to get any alcohol there that wasn't either prison wine or smuggled. People told me that periodically they had Afghans offering them like vodka, but it was like grocery store vodka from Central Asia, so I don't know how good it would have been, and who knows, it may have just been in a bottle from grocery store vodka. Who knows what was actually in it. Obviously it was way easier to get hash, but they tested for that, so you know, folks that I knew significantly got in trouble for that. One of our brigade support battalion decided, one of their companies decided that instead of doing because if I remember correctly, you get enough drug tests allocated to you while you're deployed to test the entire battalion or the entire unit. I think once, if not twice, maybe it's once every 6 months or once every 12 months. And like typically people will stagger it.
They change the requirements for urinalysis.
Yeah,
like
when you're deployed. And yes,
months, so.
In case this is coming across as strange to folks who were not in the military, while deployed, you were periodically getting pulled aside to go pee in a cup to get drug tested. Obviously,
some people. I never peed in a cup.
I only did because I was the only time that I did was when I was at the big base. Once I moved to the base where the provincial headquarters was, nothing like that ever happened. But I came back from mid-tour leave, and I was getting ready to go back to the small base, but I was on the big base, and they saw me, and they're like, "Oh yeah, by the way, your name came on the list to piss hot." And I was like, "All right, cool. Well, I have not done drugs since I joined the army, so I'm fine with it." But that was the thing that was happening. Well, the story I was going to say was that our brigade support battalion, one of their companies, they decided, I think, instead of doing staggered, they just decided to do 100% on the entire company, like everybody who was on base. And they had so many people piss hot. Like it was one of those situations where you're like, I see they've broken kayfabe and didn't give people warning to drink a lot of water. And this is what's actually going on. So
turns out when you follow the rules, all of a sudden a bunch of people get busted.
Yeah, it's weird how that happens.
You know what? To be fair, again, some people, it was always a crapshoot. And I came back from mid-tour leave in Iraq, and I said, "Did you guys want me to pee in a cup or anything?" And they said, my unit's like, "Absolutely not. We don't care. We're not going to piss test you, and nobody's going to piss test you."
You were also a reservist, though. That's the thing.
I was a reservist attached, but I was attached to the people who were we were attached to the 34th Infantry Division and the 1st ID, who were like running things. So, but they never drug tested either. So
yeah,
I don't know. It comes up, and this is 2009. This is Iraq. It's all different. Like there is no like the rules that I had to follow in one place match up with the rules that you follow. Like rules change in war zones every week.
I do find it very
funny. Rules of
funny.
engagement to rules on the base.
I do find it very funny that the Germans are Kazavacking their beer, whereas America's going to leave like billions of dollars of equipment behind and just be like, yeah, fuck it, whatever. Like all these TVs we were going to steal, fuck it, set them on fire. All these shipping containers. There's a global shipping container shortage right now. And they're like, we got a lot of shipping containers in Afghanistan. Fuck it, set it on fire. Like the waste, the just sheer waste of it all it's like doing it that way, while incredibly frustrating and appalling, is also really on brand for the way that the war has gone so far. And I don't know, man. I mean, with regard to the differences in cultures and stuff, I mean, the Germans had a bunch of problems, not to my knowledge with alcohol, but with people doing shit that really rubbed Germans the wrong way. And like, don't get me wrong, I don't have a lot of respect for Germans because I having lived there, like I think that the Germans have a lot of pieties about things, but I think that and I want to do an episode on this, when you start to dig down about Germany and how they learned from their mistakes, like, well, apparently they didn't learn from their mistakes hard enough to stop like basically every police and military unit having like a neo-Nazi gang operating in it. Because this has been a recent problem. They've been having to disband military units because there's so many neo-Nazis in them. So long story short, right-wing shit, whatever. Like I don't really have a lot of time for Germans' pieties about their notional progress. But what I'll say is that like they had problems, for example, with soldiers doing stuff that really rubbed Germans the wrong way when it was reported back home. Like for one, just the fact that they were doing offensive operations. It was the first time that I'm aware of since World War II that the Germans had used their military for offensive operations. But then also stuff like there was a big scandal in Germany because some soldiers were in some like OP somewhere and had actually found a human skeleton. And so of course they did the most German thing possible, which is to like flop their dicks on the skull and take pictures, which of course made their way around. And then people were like, wait a minute, this is frightening. What are you guys doing? So
like there's so many things you could do with a full skeleton. Putting my penis on it is really, really low. Like,
that's because you're not German, Francis.
I'm not. Well, I don't think that's necessarily a specifically German thing. I guarantee you that if a bunch of like 19-year-old American Marines came across a skeleton, somebody would put their dick on it and take a picture of it as well.
To me, it's just nothing. Nothing
And
could
hey,
be.
maybe that is a specifically German
Yeah,
thing. I don't know.
it's very very German in my opinion. But the point
I'm looking forward to all of the German listeners now yelling at us that they're not going to listen anymore because we shit talk German. Look, we're shit talking the society in general, much like we do the society of America in general. We're not shit talking actual Germans.
I mean, look, here's the thing, right? I think kind of bringing it back to the point previously that you're going to see weird stories about the sort of logistical evacuations and things along those lines, stuff coming back, things getting brought back, things being abandoned. And I think that you're going to see a lot more really sad stories of people who supported the coalition, people who worked for the Afghan government, basically falling into the hands of the Taliban. And it doesn't surprise me that America, I mean, has used bureaucratic hurdles to make it very challenging for Afghan interpreters, for example, to get to America, or, you know, personnel who are at risk. And I think that it's really sad, but my position has been for the longest time that there's no way that we're going to win a military victory against the Taliban. And the solution has to be a political one. And you want to hope that you are able to pressure the Taliban to find a political solution. But it appears to me, and I mean, I wish this was not the case, but I can't deny the stuff that I've been seeing. It appears to me that the Taliban know how fragile and corrupt and incompetent the Afghan government is. So they aren't really in a position to need a political solution. Once stuff's out of their way, they're probably just going to recapture the cities and do whatever the fuck they want, which is horrifying. But we can't beat them. We can't beat them in a military conflict. It's not. I don't want to say it's not our responsibility because, like, obviously we've made this mess, but like that's also a justification to stay forever, and we can't stay forever. We shouldn't. Morally, we cannot. We don't have a right to impose force on Afghan civilians. We just don't. We need to be gone. And the fact of the matter is, however this is going to play out, like, it's a thing that is going to have to be solved in Afghanistan by Afghans. We fucked it up worse. We absolutely have to admit that. And one way that we can perhaps begin to make amends would be to help people who need to get out. But I don't know what the answer is. I just know that the
issue that we run into is that you're going to have a lot of people saying, well, we've done this much, we've done this, that, and the other thing, so we need to fix the mess, which would be a fine idea if our idea of fixing a broken glass is just to smash it up more. Like, that's all we do. It's like, well, what if we just hit it with a hammer more? Would that make it better? Will that put these things back together? And it doesn't. It just grinds it down into a fine powder that becomes, even more dangerous. So I'm sorry. Like, there is no correct answer here. And I feel like a lot of people are expecting there to be like, well, we have to do this, we have to do that. There are these people that are counting on us, and it's like we can't do it. We don't have the ability to do it, and we need to reckon that with ourselves so that we can move on and Afghanistan can sort itself out. Because we're just not going to be able to do it, and there's just too many people who think that we can. I'm not confident in our abilities to really ever wage war on anything. See, we're good. America is good if, like, we need a quick death squad or something stood up, and if we need to kill a bunch of, like, defenseless nuns. America is fantastic at doing stuff like that. But when we're talking about, very visible operations, we're talking about having to be out among the people and doing prolonged operations and occupation. We're just not that good at it. If we got to stay longer than a month, it's going to start going downhill from there. Like, either we got to, like, take a position and move on, or we got to take a position and say, okay, we got it. Here you go. It's your guys' now. We're going to get out of here. I think that we've discovered here with this 20-year long bullshit is that we don't just have the ability to do those things. And that's fine. it's good that we can admit that. We should admit it, but also at the same time, as you said, there's not a reason for us to stay there. There's not a good and there's not a good answer for any of this. Either we stay and we continue to dump a lot of money and time and trash and shit and garbage and piss off people more and more, longer and longer, both here in America and in Afghanistan. We can continue to fight from a losing position, because we will never at this point ever be in a winning position whatsoever. Not one bit can we ever win any kind of prolonged occupation in Afghanistan. It's not great that we're going to leave, because the Taliban's going to probably take back over, and it's going to be a theocratic rule of some kind. It's not great, but again, of these two options, I think Afghanistan's self-determination is probably going to be the better choice all around. And for us to just kind of keep doing the backing away, saying, "Ooh, sorry, ooh, sorry, we didn't know. I'm sorry. I mean, we did know. We did kind of know what we were doing. A lot of assholes are really rich now because of you. But for the most part, for us, for those of us who aren't making the decisions, for, those of us who aren't the, 150, 200 people that, produced and created all this, content and propaganda around Iraq and Afghanistan in the early aughts up until now, the rest of us need to just kind of do I'm not saying anything, for just sorry, we're gonna fuck off. We're gonna fuck off, and we're gonna leave you alone. I can't even say that we should keep dumping money into the country, because who knows where that's going to go. Because certainly we don't know where the money we've dumped into the country is now. We just lost pallets of cash all over the place. So
yeah, I mean, I think the thing for us is that our military presence in that country creates more victims by its simple existence, because civilians are caught in the crossfire, and
not even crossfire, man. Just like a soldier being an asshole. Like, I remember a convoy, we stopped in the middle of for some reason, our convoy commander, and this is Afghanistan, had to stop in the middle of this small village. The road just kind of went through the village, and they're like, "Oh, we want to stop here and talk to the elders and kind of get," and it's like, "Oh, we want to have good relations, so we're going to stop and we're going to talk to the elders of whatever this small little hamlet is." And what happens? A bunch of soldiers get out and start pissing all over the ground. Guess what? Guess who wasn't our friend after all that? Afghans, just because you show up someplace like, wow, they live in a lot of poverty, they must be okay with me pissing on their front yards. Of course not.
Yeah, and I mean, something that I would point out too is just that, like, no joke, man, there's an extent to which, okay, first of all, soldiers are assholes. They're going to be assholes, and you can't supervise them all the way down to that level. Like, we have proven that the organization is incapable of doing that. If it were capable of doing that, it would have done it in the 20 years it has had the opportunity to do it. It has not. So we know that our physical presence there is offensive to people because of the way that our troops act, and because of things like cars getting run off the road and people getting shot in crossfire, people getting shot because of trigger-happy freaks or because people are psychopaths. Our presence creates enemies, makes people angry, and it makes them not want to support anything that's connected to that whatsoever. The Taliban wouldn't be able to operate if they weren't popular, like flat out, if they didn't have an appeal to people. Some of that is financial. They pay better than the military, if I remember correctly, or at least they pay the same, but they're not. The story that I used to hear was that the Taliban, you got paid better than if you got paid by the Afghan military, because the Taliban would straight up execute their commanders for embezzling money that was supposed to be paid to the fighters. Whereas in the Afghan military, that's just, that always happens. Is like, it's expected. The other thing is something that I encountered very often when I was there in 2009 during the sort of beginning of the surge in Paktika province was people getting hurt because of the military, but not directly related to the military. I'll give you some examples. Guy came in, face all fucked up because he saw a convoy and wanted to get out of the way, and tried to spin his bike around, but fell and fucked his face up. A soldier, off-duty Afghan National Army or Afghan police soldier, was in a convoy, or was riding behind an American convoy and didn't think anything of it because, like, he was pretty used to American troops, but he was off duty. and they shot him with a pen flare, and it literally shot his nose off. At least 4 times I can recall situations in which families, like station wagons, cars full of kids, driving down roads, drove over IEDs. Now, these were IEDs set to destroy American military vehicles, but they unintentionally killed families. One of the things with the whole Bergdahl saga was that while he was at that outpost, one of the district leaders came up to them and was like, I need help, because his kids had been in a car that had rolled over an IED by mistake, and they were all horribly burned. And of course, the U.S. military said, no, we didn't cause it. It's not our fault. Take them to an Afghan hospital. So of course they died. Same thing happened to me in a situation with a kid who was hit by a suicide bomber, but it technically wasn't America's fault. So they didn't do anything and he died. That's just my own very hazy recollection after 12 years. But anyone who's lived in a village, who's lived in a city where there's an American military presence, no matter how much we try to put an Afghan face on things and have, their forces alongside us, it's nothing but negative associations, and it's causing more harm than good. And we never had enough troops to have people to keep people safe from the Taliban, and I'm putting that in scare quotes, because I don't necessarily think that you would be any safer having your village be under permanent occupation by the U.S. military or the Afghan military as well. Not in my experience. But we couldn't be everywhere, so no one had any incentive to trust us. The people who did trust us got killed, and now we're leaving, like the Taliban always said we would. So at the end of the day, us being there was a disaster. We shouldn't have been there. And it's weird because people who spoke out against the war in Afghanistan in 2001 were derided, harassed, attacked, cast out of polite conversation. But they were right. Like, I could see 2 points of divergence that could have made the difference in how this turned out. Number one, we could have taken the Taliban up on their offer to hand over Al-Qaeda. And who knows if they would have done it or not. But if they had, then we wouldn't have invaded. We wouldn't have had to invade. And I say had, obviously, like not because of the narrative at the time that people pushed, but like the justification that the Bush administration used for going into Afghanistan would have been taken away. And number two, after the Bonn Accords were signed in December 2001, we could have just pulled all our troops out. We had a very small presence relative to how big it got down the road. We could have just, once they had their new government or they were convening the Loya Jirga to stand up a new government, we could have just left. And either one of those would have prevented the situation we see today. But we stayed, and I don't know if we stayed because of mission creep. I don't know if we stayed because deep down they're like, hell yeah, we can put more bases on a different side of Iran. I don't know, man. But it's a disaster, and it should have... I knew we needed to leave 12 years ago when I was there. The fact that it's taken this long is an abomination, and I don't really have any other answers for it.
Yeah, you were in Afghanistan 12 years ago. I was in Afghanistan 17 years ago. Yeah. And we're talking about the Afghan drawdown. And I know people who were there in OEF 1 and OEF 2. So, and it's time to be done with it, because like we said, we're just not going to win it. There are no hearts and minds that we can win anymore. The only hearts and everybody just hates us. If you're not making money off of us, off of the American troops, then you're probably pissed off at the American troops.
100%.
And even the people making money off of us are probably pissed off at us too. Let's be honest.
Well, yeah, we are. We were never particularly kind or understanding or empathetic guests, and we never took it seriously. We never took the stuff that would have needed to happen for us to do our Imperial Raj shit seriously. Like, not that that's a good thing, but we didn't take that seriously. We didn't take any of it seriously. And, the fact of the matter is, all of our friends died for nothing. All the civilians who died for nothing. It's an abomination, and we have to face up to that. And the only way you face up to it is to stop doing the harm to begin with. And that means we have to leave.
To own it, one, to say this didn't work, and we fucked up. And then to walk away from it and say, I'm sorry that we fucked it up. We're going to try to do better in the future. I don't believe that America actually will try to do better in the future, but it'd be at least nice if America could ever say, yeah, it was a mistake. But it never will be. It'll always be, well, we didn't win because of this or because of that. Like, it always reminds me of like the old History Channel shows where it'd just be like, if Hitler had just done this thing, he would have won World War II. And it's like, there's a lot. It's never as simple as a 40-minute episode on, History Channel of how to win a world war of any kind. So,
yeah, man.
Yeah. We're gonna be dealing with it for the next 20 years. The next war that America is gonna fight is gonna be the posting wars, where we all talk about how Afghanistan, there's just gonna be a lot of, well, look what happened in Afghanistan now. Look what happened there now because we left, because we did these things. Fucking man, there's just gonna be a lot of shitty conservatives, or maybe we're gonna leave and they're gonna go back to ignoring Afghanistan completely. I don't know. Like, I really honestly feel like once we're gone and like gone, America is gonna collectively stop thinking about Afghanistan as a country.
Oh, 100%. I mean, that's what happened when the Soviets left. We stopped caring about that country entirely. But I will say, I have no time for any of those arguments. I have no time for the people like, oh, we should have taken the gloves off, which seems to imply we should have just mass executed everyone. Like, it's disgusting. It's beneath your dignity to entertain that for a second. Well, the fact of the matter is we should never have been there. And we went, we claimed we had justification, and in the grand scheme of things, we fucked it. The way that we fuck every occupation we've done since, well, ever. I mean, there were other forces at play, post World War II and in the Korean War, but yeah, it's just depressing and sad, and there's no good answer. So I hate to stick a fork in it like this, but there just doesn't seem like there's any other way. So maybe we should just
And I mean, in a lot of ways, I kind of want to be done talking about Afghanistan too. I'm glad that we're doing the drawdown. I'm glad we're getting out, and I'm sure that we will revisit it. We will continue to talk about it because it is a very significant portion of both of our lives. And as well as the military, as well as this whole concept of a podcast in general. But there's so much. It's just like I'm so tired of having to hear about how we're fucking it up. And it's very heartening and sad that it's going to be like we have to leave it in a fucked up state, but obviously also there's just no way that we're going to make it any better. So this is probably for the best.
Yeah.
So
I mean, there's no other answer. And I'm at the point in my life where I would have to disregard every single one of my own subjective observations from my own experience to be able to make the argument that America is going to get it right this time when it comes to military occupation of another country. There's just no way I can say that in good faith. You know what I mean? Like, yep. I've seen what I've seen, and I've read what I've read, and I was there. I was a fucking first lieutenant, in the occupation of Afghanistan, and it was wrong then, and we knew it then. It's wrong now. It was wrong in 2001. Like, it was a disaster, and it needs to end. It should have ended 20 years ago. Should never have happened. And if that argument, if you want to say they had to go in and try, well, they didn't fucking get bin Laden until 2011. He was in Pakistan. That whole 10 years was wasted. We should have just not gone. And certainly in 2001, after the Bonn agreements, the Bonn Accords, we should have left immediately. And that didn't happen. So. Yeah. But Francis, I know you have a bonus episode for this past week that you want to plug.
I do. I talked with Kelsey Atherton, writer for all over the place. Mostly focuses on nuclear and AI and other fancy military futuristic stuff. And we talked about the future of artificial intelligence, and not just artificial intelligence for the home, but artificial intelligence with a gun. So please enjoy.
The training environment. So this is a big problem, is that the training environment can only have so much data. And if you bring a system built for like how to make out objects, right? Like say you're even training it just to like hunt tanks, right? There's civilians don't have those except with very rare circumstances. And then whatever, they know they've got tanks, they know what they're doing. But like if you're training it to
you hope.
I mean, one hopes. And at the very least, it's very clear to identify a tank. It's hard to recognize a tank as something else. But if you're training it to hunt tanks in a desert, and then suddenly you find yourself like brought into a like it's foggy. It's an urban environment. You are training in open desert. The camera knows what it looks like when like the sun reflects off the barrel of a 120 millimeter cannon. It does not have a great sense of what it looks like when like the exhaust pipe of a school bus is coming down a hill and catches the sun in a weird way. You can have misrecognition just because the camera isn't prepared for it. The data is new. The data is novel. Or you could even have something so simple as like images painted weird on something, or just enough things in the wrong place, like a forced perspective trick if it's not calibrating the image sensor with like a laser sensor to mark distance, if it's only looking at like one point to check. There's all sorts of ways things can fail when presented with new or unfamiliar data. And there's no training that can cover everything you might encounter in war.
I really wonder if we can Wile E. Coyote one of these things where like, you know, we paint like a tunnel on a wall somewhere and see if it just runs into the wall.
Well, so there's a great example. So the closest thing we can do, and we could certainly do that, right? There's a few of, we have autonomous cars is the categorical term, though it's wrong, but we have cars that drive aided by sensors. And like Teslas are the best known example of this, in part because Tesla owners hear autopilot and treat it as autonomous, and then they get like arrested for riding in the back seat of a car with no one in the front seat while it crosses the Golden Gate Bridge, and stuff like that. And so one of the examples researchers love to fool Teslas, and more power to them, is they took a simple piece of tape and they extended the 3 on a 35 mile per hour sign, and a Tesla read it. It didn't even connect it all the way. They just read a 3 with a longer bar in the middle as an 8. And so the Tesla, seeing 35 miles, what would read to any human as a 35 mile an hour sign, accelerated to 85 miles per hour.
Fantastic. And you know, I certainly don't want this to be a let's all shit on AI kind of thing, because I definitely feel like AI has its purposes. Like if you've ever used a chatbot, however much like you dislike chatbots, those are AI. There's a lot of algorithm, there's a lot of fancy math that goes on behind it, and there's a lot of human input. Like it's not just, you know, I really feel like intelligence is a misnomer that we use for like autonomous, maybe, but like even autonomous is a misnomer because like at this point, nothing that we're creating has any intelligence. Like it gets data, it parses the data, but it still needs human input to understand the data properly. Like, you know, we need to, you know, a person needs to sit down and put all kinds of different apples in front of the computer, right? And say, this is an apple, this is an apple, this is an apple. And then, you know, obviously we still have the problems. You can put iPod on it or something, or maybe you could put a pear, like a really squashed pear, and it says that's an apple. You know, there's still, there is always going to be a human element that is necessary for parsing all of the information, putting it in and saying, no, throw that away, but keep this. So I don't, you know, AI in itself, you know, autonomous, you know, kind of things like this are good in a lot of different ways. There's, you know, there's autonomous working machines inside of factories. You know, that's how all of our stuff gets made, or these giant machines that are programmed to work in a certain way. They're still not like, you know, a welding arm in a Ford factory doesn't know how to make a fucking car, but it does know how to weld a specific thing that it was built for and programmed for. And maybe it can be programmed to weld other things, but until you do that, it's not necessarily, you know, an AI machine. It doesn't have any kind of intelligence there. So, you know, application wise, do we see good application for, you know, quote, AI, end quote, in the military?
Absolutely. And the trick, right, is you see it the further and further away you get from it doing like the opposite of lethality is where you see this stuff. You see it a lot in logistics. You see it a lot in automation, right? Like autopilots are a real thing. People hear that and think a machine that automatically does all the stuff of flying. And mostly what an autopilot does is it does all the boring stuff of flying. It holds the joystick level, right? The throttle level. It keeps things working smoothly within defined parameters as it understands by sensors. And these work well almost all the time. They work super well when you have redundant systems. They work even better when you check your systems for kinds of error, right? Like the thing that happened with the Boeing Max was it had an AI.
Yeah, the 737s.
Yeah, which they had an AI that told them to fly at a certain angle because that's how you make that longer airframe work. But it didn't have sufficient checks on it. It wasn't a redundant system, and it could easily lead to the machine automatically crashing because there wasn't like human oversight or training or a lot of irresponsible stuff engineered into it. And that's what is often missing, right? Is if you're working with a smart system and you're designing it for human use, you need to understand what it will take for the humans to use it. Like, I think even in the sense of like these targeting things, if you're going to have automated targeting, you should make sure that it's making the system as transparent as possible to the person using it. And that doesn't mean like it needs to spit out what the code is, right? Like I couldn't read a mathematical model. I don't think hardly anyone in the field could, but you should at least make it sure that it's clear how it's making those decisions. And you should make sure it has an auditable process afterwards so that if something does fuck up, you need to know how the machine fucked it up.
Right. And yeah, if you're getting back information, because a lot of this information isn't necessarily a camera or it's not necessarily a picture or a video. Sometimes it may just come back with information that says, I think I see something over here that kind of needs to be dealt with, and then you go deal with it. And if it does need to be dealt with, you say yes, correct, or if not, here's the update to it. And I feel like when it comes to military and AI, we're always projecting it as a lethality thing. But yeah, like you said, in logistics, I mean, Amazon warehouses, for all of the bad things that it does to the people, it is in a lot of ways run by machines, run by automatic machines that scan something. When I scan this thing, I go and do this thing. When I scan that thing, I go and do that thing. I drop it here, or I drop it there. So obviously the automation part is very useful. We're just now trying to what if an Amazon robot could shoot you? How cool would that be? Or what if the Boston, the fucking and this is my biggest problem is you start seeing this like the Boston Dynamics like dog or whatever, and they're like, oh, we put fun little like sensors on it, and now it's kind of like a dog, and that I feel like people are going to have like an immediate like, I do not want a robot cop, please. Like we have a movie for that. It's called RoboCop. And I know that what you got here is not Peter Sellers, but I also still don't want it. Like Peter Sellers was an aberration as well and probably should have been destroyed at the end of that movie. We're not going to get into that though. All right. And as always, you can follow me at Army Strang, follow Nate at In These Deserts, follow the podcast at Hell of a Way. Thank you so much for supporting us in every way that you do, whether it's on the Patreon, whether it is just listening and telling your friends. We do appreciate it. We enjoy being able to come in and do our fucking therapy once a week like this. This is a lot cheaper than going to a real therapist, I'll tell you what.
This is very true. We really appreciate you listening. Thank you again, and we will talk to you next week.